Nobody moved. That's the part that stayed with Vera long after everything else had settled. Not the shouting, not the way the little boy pressed himself flat against the wall like he was trying to disappear into the paint, not even what came after. What stayed was the silence of 15 people sitting at white-clothed tables with their forks halfway to their mouths, watching a grown man scream at a 7-year-old, and not one of them doing a single thing about it. Vera had been carrying a tray of desserts to table 9 when she heard it, the crack of a palm hitting marble. Then a voice, loud, slick, the kind of voice that had never once been told no, cutting through the low jazz and the clinking glasses of the Meridian like a blade. "Do you have any idea what this rug costs? Do you think this is a playground?" She stopped walking. The boy, small, dark-haired, wearing a dress shirt 2 sizes too big for him, was standing near the entrance to the private dining room, staring at a spreading red stain on the floor. A glass of cranberry juice. He'd knocked over a glass of cranberry juice. He couldn't have been more than 7. His chin was trembling, but he wasn't crying, and somehow that was worse. He looked like a child who had already learned that crying didn't help. The man standing over him was named Bradford Quill. Vera had served him before. He came in twice a month with clients, ordered the most expensive Bordeaux on the menu, and tipped exactly 15% to the dollar. He had the soft hands and the hard eyes of a man who had spent his whole life making other people feel small. "I asked you a question," Bradford Quill said, leaning down. "Have you lost your mind?" Vera set her tray on the nearest surface. She crossed the floor before she had time to think about it. "Excuse me." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. She stepped between Bradford Quill and the boy, close enough that Quill had to take a half step back. "I'll have this cleaned up in just a moment. It's not a problem at all." Quill looked at her the way men like him always looked at service staff, like she was a piece of furniture that had suddenly started talking. "It absolutely is a problem," he said. "This is a $500 rug, and this child has been running wild in here unsupervised for." "He knocked over a glass," Vera said. She kept her voice pleasant. She was very, very good at keeping her voice pleasant. "It's cranberry juice on a dark wool rug. It comes out. I'll take care of it personally." She crouched down next to the boy. Up close, she could see that his shirt had a small embroidered crest on the pocket, the kind that came from expensive private schools. She could also see that his hands were shaking. "Hey," she said quietly, just to him. "What's your name?" He looked at her like he wasn't sure if it was a trick. "Luca," he said. "Hi, Luca, I'm Vera. You want to come stand with me for a second while we get this sorted out?" He nodded. She stood up and put a light hand on his shoulder, and he didn't pull away. She was aware in the peripheral way you become aware of things when you're very focused on something else, that the room had gone quiet, not the natural quiet of a restaurant between courses, the held breath kind. She was also aware, though she couldn't have said exactly when she first noticed him, of the man standing in the doorway to the private room. He hadn't been there before. She would have noticed. You noticed a man like that. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, tall, with dark hair going silver at the temples, and the kind of stillness that didn't come from being calm. It came from never needing to move quickly, because things simply arranged themselves around you. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Vera's monthly rent, and he was watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately read. Not anger, not the polished social concern of a manforming form or an audience, something quieter than either of those things. She turned back to Bradford Quill. "I think we're all set here," she said. "If you'd like to return to your table, I can bring out a complimentary course while I arrange for the rug to be." "I don't want a complimentary course," Quill said. "I want to know why this child is wandering around unsupervised in a restaurant of this caliber, and I want someone to explain to me why I'm being spoken to like this by a Mr. Quill." The voice came from the doorway. 2 words. That was all. But Bradford Quill stopped talking like someone had cut the power to him. The man in the suit walked into the room. He moved the way certain men move in spaces they have always owned, unhurried, certain, each step landing with the quiet weight of someone who has never once in his life needed to raise his voice to be heard. He stopped beside Vera. He looked at Bradford Quill for a long moment without saying anything, and in that silence Vera watched something shift in Quill's expression. The bluster didn't leave exactly, it just lost its shape. "I was simply pointing out," Quill began, "that the child, I saw what you were doing." 3 words this time, even quieter. Bradford Quill picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. He said something about this being unprofessional and about having a word with management. Then he left, and the door swung shut behind him, and the room slowly remembered how to breathe. The man looked down at Luca. Something happened to his face. Not a smile, exactly down. Just a fraction, just enough. "Are you all right?" he asked. Luca looked up at him and said, with the peculiar dignity of a small child who has decided not to let this ruin his evening, "I spilled my juice. I know. It doesn't matter." He crouched down the same way Vera had, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. Up close, she could see that Luca had the same dark eyes, the same particular quality of stillness, even now. "Did he touch you?" "No. Good." He put his hand on Luca's head, briefly, gently. Then he stood up and looked at Vera. "Thank you," he said. It was the simplest sentence. She would think about the way he said it for a long time afterward, not like a man thanking a waiter for refilling his water, but like a man who had seen something and was naming it. "It was nothing," she said, "because that was what you said. It wasn't nothing." He held her gaze for a moment. "What is your name?" "Mr. Caruso?" said one of the men who had appeared behind him. She hadn't noticed the others until now, two men in dark suits standing just outside the doorway. "The reservation." "A moment," he said, without looking away from her. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a card. It was plain white with only a name and a number, no company, no title. He held it out to her. "My son was alone tonight because his nanny had a family emergency," he said. "I was in a meeting I could not leave for another 40 minutes. He should not have been left in the main dining room unsupervised." A pause. "That is my failure, not his. But you." He glanced at the card, then back at her. "I would like to call you tomorrow, if you're willing, to express my thanks more properly." Vera took the card. Her fingertips were steady, which she considered an achievement. "Of course," she said. He nodded. He turned to Luca, said something quiet that she couldn't hear, and then he and the two men in suits moved back through the private dining room doorway, and the door closed behind them. Vera stood there holding the card. Her colleague Dana appeared at her elbow approximately 3 seconds later. "Vera," Dana said, in a tone usually reserved for seismic events and lottery wins. "Do you know who that is?" He said his name was Mr. Caruso. "His name," Dana said, "is Matteo Caruso, as in Julian Caruso's son, as in the Caruso Group, as in the family that owns 3 of the largest private development companies in Ontario, and also, if the rumors are true, several other things that don't show up in any annual report." Vera looked at the card in her hand. "Oh," she said. She went back to work. She cleaned up the cranberry juice herself, exactly as she'd promised. She finished her shift. She drove home to her apartment in the East End, where her younger sister Poppy was asleep on the pull-out sofa, because Poppy's landlord had raised the rent in January, and Vera had told her she could stay as long as she needed, which was going on 4 months now. She set the card on the kitchen counter and stood looking at it for a while. Then she made herself a cup of tea and went to bed. She was not a woman who made a habit of receiving calls from men named Matteo Caruso. She was a woman who worked double shifts when they were available, who sent money home to her mother in Sudbury every month, who had given up her bedroom for her sister without being asked. She had a practical nature and a good memory for wine pairings, and she had spent the last 3 years at the Meridian learning how to be invisible in precisely the way that good service required. She was not, she told herself, the kind of woman things like this happened to. She was wrong about that. He called the next morning at 10. His voice on the phone was the same as in person, measured, careful with pauses. He asked how she was. She said she was well, thank you. He thanked her again for the previous evening, and she gave the same answer she'd given before. It was nothing. And he said again, quietly, that it wasn't. Then he asked if she would be willing to meet him for coffee that afternoon. She almost said no. She held the phone and looked at her sister asleep on the pull-out sofa and thought about the sensible thing and the practical thing, and then she said yes. They met at a place he suggested on King Street, not far from the financial district. It was the kind of cafe that was neither trying too hard nor not trying hard enough. Warm wood, good light, no music. He was already there when she arrived. He stood up when she came in, which she hadn't expected. He was less imposing in daylight. Still the same quality of stillness, but without the formal context of the Meridian around him. He looked like someone who had simply been carrying a great deal for a long time and had gotten quietly good at it. Luca was not with him. They ordered coffee. For a while they talked about small things. She told him about growing up in northern Ontario. He told her he'd grown up in Toronto, but spent summers in Cape Breton. And they discovered they both had strong opinions about the Trans-Canada Highway in October, which made her laugh, which seemed to surprise him slightly. Then he said, "I want to be honest with you about why I asked you here." She set her cup down. "All right. Luca's mother passed away 14 months ago," he said. It was very simple and very direct. The way people say things they've said many times but that don't get any easier. She had a heart condition that we didn't know about. Luke said was 6. He looked at his coffee. He doesn't speak much anymore. He did before. He was very talkative. He used to narrate everything. What the dog was doing, what clouds looked like, everything. A pause. He stopped in the weeks after she died, and he hasn't really started again. Vera was quiet. "What you did last night," he said. "The way you spoke to him. He asked me this morning if the lady from the restaurant was okay." She felt something shift quietly in her chest. "He asked about me. He wanted to make sure you hadn't gotten in trouble for speaking to the man." Something moved through his expression. "He was worried about you. That's the most he's said in one breath in 4 months." She looked at him. He looked back. "I'm not entirely sure what I'm asking," he said, which was the most honest thing she'd heard anyone say in a long time. "I know this is strange. I know how it must appear. But Luca has a full-time nanny. Rosalind is wonderful with him. And he has therapists and tutors and every resource I can arrange. And none of it," he stopped, started again. "None of it's made him want to talk to anyone until last night," Vera said. "Until last night." She looked out the window at King Street. A streetcar went by. Someone was arguing on a phone outside. "I work doubles at the Meridian. 3 nights a week," she said. "I have a sister living with me right now, and my mother's not in great health. I'm not." She looked back at him. "I don't know what I am to you, Mr. Caruso. I'm a waitress who stopped a man from yelling at your son. I know what you are," he said. "I watched you for 30 seconds before you noticed me. You didn't hesitate. You didn't calculate. You just went." He paused. "Do you know how rare that is?" She didn't have an answer for that. "I'm not asking you to be anything you're not," he said. "I'm asking if you'd be willing to spend some time with Luca as a paid arrangement. I would compensate you properly. Come to the house a few times. Let him get used to you. If it doesn't work, there's no pressure, and if it does work—" He was quiet for a moment. "Then we figure out what comes next." She went. She told herself it was practical. The money he offered was more than she made in a week at the Meridian. She told herself she was doing it for Luca, which was also true. She told herself it had nothing to do with the careful way Matteo Caruso had said, "I watched you for 30 seconds, like it was a fact he was reporting, rather than something personal. The house was in Rosedale, not the showy Rosedale of renovation feature spreads, but a quiet street with old trees and houses that had been in families for 3 generations. The kind of neighborhood that had stopped trying to prove anything a long time ago. Rosalind met her at the door. She was a tall Jamaican-Canadian woman in her 50s with a warm face and an efficient handshake, and the look of someone who had seen many things come and go in this house and was reserving judgment on this particular one. "He's in the kitchen," she said. "He knows you're coming." Luca was sitting at the kitchen island doing a puzzle. It was a complicated one, Canadian geography, all the provinces and territories, and he had the northern territories mostly done. "Hi, Luca," Vera said. He looked up. Then he looked back at his puzzle. Then he said, without looking up, "Nunavut is the hardest one." "I believe it," she said. She sat down across from him. "I'm from up north. I used to think Nunavut and the Northwest Territories were the same thing until I was about 11. He looked up again. "They're different. I know that now." A pause. Then he pushed a piece across the island toward her. It was a piece of Lake Superior. She stayed for 2 hours that first day. She didn't try to make him talk. She just did the puzzle with him. And then they read a book she found on the shelf. A book about deep-sea creatures, which he clearly loved because he kept correcting the captions. And then she said goodbye and told him she'd see him on Thursday. On the way out, Rosalind caught her arm in the hallway. "He talked," she said quietly, "more than he's talked in months." Vera nodded. "I don't know how you did it," Rosalind said. "I didn't do anything. Vera thought about it. I didn't need him to be anything. He was just a kid doing a puzzle." Rosalind looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once, the way people nod when they've decided something. "Thursday," she said. "Don't be late." She came on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Then Saturdays too, when Luca asked Rosalind to ask his father if the lady from the restaurant could come on Saturdays as well. The lady from the restaurant. That was how he referred to her for the first 3 weeks. Vera found it oddly endearing. She learned things about Luca slowly. He loved geography and hated mathematics, but was secretly good at it. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of Canadian wildlife and could identify any bird in Ontario by its call. He was afraid of the dark in the specific way of children who have lost someone. Not the dark itself, but what it left room for. He slept with the hall light on and a night light shaped like the moon that his mother had given him. She also learned things about Matteo Caruso without meaning to. He was there some evenings when she came, in the background, making calls, meeting with people in his study. He always acknowledged her when she arrived. Always asked if she needed anything. Always thanked her when she left. He was never in the way, never hovering. But she was aware of him in a way she'd never quite been aware of another person. A low, constant frequency she couldn't tune out. One evening she was reading to Luca on the back porch. A chapter book about an otter who became an explorer, which Luca thought was scientifically questionable but narratively compelling. When she heard the side gate open and Matteo came around the corner of the house, still in his work clothes, jacket folded over his arm, tie loosened. He stopped when he saw them. It was just for a moment, a brief stillness. And then he came up the porch steps and sat down in the Adirondack chair across from them and said, "Don't stop on my account," and so she didn't. She read 2 more chapters. Matteo didn't say anything. When she looked up once, his eyes were closed, his head tipped back against the chair. Luca had fallen asleep against her arm, and she was sitting there in the late August evening light, thinking that this was the most comfortable she had been in years, and that she had absolutely no idea what to do with that information. She drove home through the warm evening and sat in her parked car outside her apartment for a while before she went in. Things shifted in September. Poppy had found a place, a 1-bedroom in Leslieville, affordable enough that she could swing it, and on the Saturday she moved out. She hugged Vera in the doorway for a long time and said, "I know you're going to be okay. You're always okay, but you're also allowed to not be okay sometimes." You know that Vera said yes. She wasn't entirely sure she meant it. That same evening, she got a message from Matteo. Not a call, a message, which was unusual. "Luca asked me tonight if you have a family. I told him I wasn't sure. He says he wants to know because he wants to draw you a picture and needs to know how many people to put in it." She stared at the message for a moment. She typed back, "Tell him it's just me and my mum and my sister. Though my sister just moved out, so the picture might need updating." 3 minutes later, he says that's okay. He'll draw it in pencil first. She sat with her phone in her hand and felt something she couldn't entirely name, something tender and also slightly dangerous, the way frostbite feels right before it becomes serious. She messaged back, "Are you always this formal in text messages?" A pause, then I'm told it's a flaw. It's not a flaw. It's just funny. Another pause. Then Luca says goodnight. She smiled at her phone alone in her apartment. Then she put it down, because she was a practical woman, and this was a situation that called for practicality. And she made herself dinner and went to bed. The thing she hadn't told anyone, not Poppy, not her colleague Dana, not her mother in Sudbury who would have had opinions, was that 3 weeks before Vera had stepped between Bradford Quill and Luca at the Meridian, she had handed in a notice to her landlord and applied for a transfer to a restaurant in Vancouver. She hadn't told anyone because she wasn't entirely sure why she'd done it. It had felt at the time like a practical decision, lower cost of living, a change, a reset. She'd been carrying something for a long time without quite knowing what it was. The feeling that she was standing in the wrong version of her own life. Like she'd made a series of small, reasonable decisions that had quietly added up to something that wasn't quite right. She had paid the transfer deposit. She had told the Vancouver restaurant to expect her in October. She had not yet told the Meridian. She had also, she now realized, not thought about Vancouver in approximately 6 weeks. She thought about it the evening she sat in Matteo's back garden while Luca showed her his bird feeder, a cedar one he'd built with Rosalind, and described in very precise detail the difference between a white-throated sparrow and a white-crowned sparrow, which were apparently commonly confused. "Are you staying for dinner?" Luca asked. He asked her this most visits now. She usually said no. "I shouldn't," she said. "Dad makes pasta on Fridays. He's not bad at it." From somewhere inside the house, she heard what might have been Matteo saying, "I can hear you, Luca." Luca didn't look remotely guilty about this. "I'll stay for dinner," Vera said. Dinner was pasta with a simple tomato sauce and too much garlic, which Vera thought was exactly the right amount of garlic. Luca sat between them and spent most of the meal telling his father everything he'd told Vera about the sparrows. And Matteo listened with the full and serious attention of a man for whom his son's words were the most important information he had received all day. Watching it did something to her that she didn't have a word for. Afterward, while Rosalind took Luca upstairs for his bath, Vera helped clear the table even though Matteo told her she didn't have to. They stood at the sink in the quiet kitchen, and she was very aware of the fact that they were standing close to each other, and that the house was quiet and warm, and that she was still here when she'd said she shouldn't stay. "Vera," he said. She turned. He was looking at her with the same expression he'd had the first night, in the Meridian, after Quill had left, the expression she hadn't been able to name then, and still couldn't, not exactly. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to know that whatever your answer is, it won't change anything here. Luca's situation, your arrangement here, that stays as long as you want it." She nodded. "I would like," he said carefully, "to take you to dinner, not here, somewhere else, just the two of us." The kitchen was very quiet. "I'm moving to Vancouver," she said. It was the first time she'd said it out loud to anyone. He looked at her. He didn't say anything. "In October," she said. "I applied for a transfer months ago. I'd already paid the deposit." "I see," he said, had, past tense. She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she said. "I don't know what it is anymore." He was very still. "What changed?" She looked at him. "You know what changed." He said nothing for a long time, then quietly, Will you still let me take you to dinner? She exhaled. Yes, she said. I'll let you take me to dinner. They went to dinner. It was not at a restaurant like the Meridian. He took her to a small Portuguese place in Little Portugal that his wife had liked, which he told her directly, and which she appreciated because it was honest. They drank wine and talked for 3 hours. He told her about the early years of the Caruso Group, the first building. A failed deal that had nearly ended everything. The slow accumulation of trust in a world that ran on it. She told him about Sudbury and her father leaving when she was 12, and the way she'd turned herself into someone reliable, as a response to having grown up in a house that wasn't. He listened the same way he listened to Luca. With his full attention, everything else set down. When they left, he walked her to her car. October, he said. I don't know about October anymore, she said. I'm not asking you to stay, he said. I want to be clear about that. I'm aware of who I am and what I come with. I'm not asking you to rearrange your life. What are you asking? He looked at her in the amber glow of the streetlight. I'm asking for more time, he said, however much you're willing to give. She thought about Vancouver, the deposit she'd already paid, the careful practical logic of a decision she'd made when she was someone trying to reset. She thought about Luca and his sparrows and his geography puzzles. She thought about standing at a kitchen sink in Rosedale with the feeling that she had somehow, without meaning to, walked into exactly the right version of her own life. I'll call the Vancouver restaurant Monday, she said. See if I can get the deposit back. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. She looked at him. I want to. She did not get the full deposit back. She got 70%, which she decided was worth it. Poppy, when Vera told her over the phone, was quiet for exactly 4 seconds and then said Vera Ashworth in the tone of someone who had been waiting for this particular phone call for a very long time. Her mother said, "Is he kind?" Vera thought about the way he'd crouched down to Luca's level. The way he'd thanked her the first night, not like a transaction, but like a man naming something true. The way he'd said, "I'm not asking you to rearrange your life," and meant it. Yes, she said. He's kind, that's the one thing, her mother said. The rest you can work out, but that's the one thing. It was a Saturday in early October when Luca, sitting at the kitchen island with a cup of hot chocolate and a fresh geography puzzle, South America this time, looked up at Vera with his dark, serious eyes and said, "Are you going to stay?" She had been told, by the therapist Matteo used, that Luca sometimes asked things directly that adults would dance around for months. She had been warned, in a gentle, professional way, to be honest with him. "I think so," she said. "He considered this. You think so or you know so?" "I know so," she said. He nodded, satisfied. He pushed a piece of the puzzle toward her, Lake Titicaca, which was quite a funny shape. "Good," he said. "You can have the window seat, I already told Dad." She looked at him. "What window seat?" "The one in the sitting room. Rosalind says it's the best seat in the house and nobody uses it. So I told Dad you should have it." He picked up another puzzle piece. He said okay. Vera sat with that for a moment. She had walked into the Meridian 3 months ago as a woman who had decided, sensibly and practically, to leave. She had stood between a frightened boy and a man with a loud voice, and she had done it without thinking, which was the only way she ever did anything that mattered. And somehow that one moment, 30 seconds, Matteo had said, "I watched you for 30 seconds before you noticed me," had rearranged everything. Not loudly, not dramatically. Quietly, the way the best things rearranged you, one piece at a time, until you looked up and didn't recognize the old version of the picture anymore. "Tell him I said thank you," she said to Luca. He didn't look up from his puzzle. "Tell him yourself," he said. "He's in the study." She went.